This is the Whimsy Farm Podcast. I'm Carolyn Crane.
There's a big wide world right out your door. Good people doing good things. Whoa, it's a big wide world. Now is the time. Now is our time.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 29. Today's episode is an encore of season 1, episode 11, Fighting Fascism. I could think of no better way to mark the 250th anniversary of the United States' founding than to revisit this topic. As author Craig Johnson says, fascism isn't new and it isn't going anywhere. And the best way to guard against it is to teach our children about it and how and why to avoid it. On today's episode, we talk about fascism. Our first guest is Craig A. Johnson, author of How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism. Then we spend some time with poet Mariam Berry on our recurring segment, Poetry Sustains. Welcome, everyone, to the Whimsy Farm Podcast. Today we talk to Craig Johnson. He wrote How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism. It's part of the Rutledge Studies in Fascism and the Far Right. Welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Lovely to be here.
So I wanted to talk about just say a couple things before I ask you some questions. For one thing, the structure of your book I really appreciated. This is obviously a difficult topic, and I found it very straightforward. I felt like you took your reader by the hand and guided them through. And one of the ways you did that I thought was so softening and compassionate was your use of first person.
Oh.
You're right there with them saying, we got to talk about these things and I've got your back. And I appreciated that. I also wanted to say that as I read this book, I looked at it through 3 lenses. One, I have 3 sons. They are all past the danger age you talk about, and fortunately none are fascists. I also have 2 grandnephews that are just in elementary, middle school, and they're very dear to me. I thought a lot about them while I was reading the book. And thirdly, I teach community college. So a huge part of my students are in your demographic. So all 3 of those lenses had me really paying attention to what sometimes things that really surprised me. And I also felt like we could talk for an hour about every chapter. So we're going to have some self-control. But this is, as you state right from the start, it's a guidebook. It's to help people. It's not intended to be a history of fascism, although you do offer a succinct history of it. But you start by saying this is to help people, and particularly regarding young men. And that raises the obvious first question. Why is it talk to your son about fascism? Why are young men in your target here?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for your comments. Those were very, very kind and very insightful. I did intentionally write the book in the first person in order to make the reader feel less alone, because I know that this is a very heavy subject. The reason that the book is about young men is for 2 reasons. The first is that fascism appeals to young men, and I mean that in both possible senses. Fascists intentionally seek out young men in order to recruit them for fascism, and fascism as an ideology is inherently misogynist. It's inherently sexist. That's probably the most consistent feature, besides being right-wing in general, of all fascisms throughout history. The other reason that I wanted to write a book focusing on young men is that young men are the people who go out and do the dirty work for fascists. And so if there is somebody in your life who is at risk of doing something stupid, doing something ill-advised in the interests of a fascist party or a fascist movement, it's probably a young man. This isn't to imply or deny that there isn't a lot of danger posed by fascism to women or to people who are not young. That is absolutely the case. But this is a book that's specifically about avoiding fascist recruitment. And so that's why it's How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism.
What specifically should elders be looking for in the habits and in the tastes of young men they feel might be at risk?
So there are a lot of warning signs. This is one of the more complicated things about this issue, which is that your son, your nephew, a student, they're probably not going to show up wearing a swastika. They're probably not going to get a tattoo that's like clearly racist. They're probably not going to say Sieg Heil. They might. But more likely than not, their interest in these things will appear in memes, in jokes, in comedy, in media tastes, in what their feeds and algorithms show them, in ways that'll be a little bit harder to see. So it's not going to look like a neo-Nazi or a skinhead. It's not going to look like that. Instead, the warning signs to look at are roughly similar to the warning signs that you're probably, as a caretaker, the audience of the book, the sort of things that as caretakers, people are already paying attention to. Abrupt changes in friend group, abrupt changes in habits, abrupt changes in sense of humor, in who is the butt of a joke. As kids get older, we're also talking about, we're talking about the end of the age group that I'm talking about. So that's teens, early 20s. These are people who are political. Some of them can vote. Some of them will be preparing to vote. They're taking civics classes in high school, maybe. So major changes in their earnest political perspective are also things that you might be paying attention to. In the United States, as many listeners and readers are from, but also in the United Kingdom and many other places, we're talking about Donald Trump. If the kid is excited about, more interested in somebody like Donald Trump, that's a good warning sign.
What are some features specifically online versus in person that a caregiver or parent might notice?
Yeah, so in-person radicalization looks very much like how it always has. The kid gets it from a coach, from a fellow student, from somebody in their church youth group. It just trickles into society, right? Online radicalization is a little bit different. It's not so different that we can't use the same tools to fight it. My argument is that online radicalization can be fought in the same way that any kind of radicalization can, not by censorship, but instead by confronting the problem earnestly and directly. So online radicalization happens in two main ways. Less likely would be your kid intentionally seeking out content. That's probably not going to happen. Very small numbers of people are like, really, really revved and ready to go for fascism. That's not particularly common. More common is that online influencers have been seeding fascist content into online culture for decades. We know this. We have the receipts. Like we can read their posts from 20 years ago where they say, I'm going after the 10-year-olds. I want to produce content that is interesting, exciting for 10-year-olds, specifically 10-year-old boys, and I want them to become fascists through this content. Primarily, they do that through jokes, through memes. So that's what it's going to look like primarily when it comes to fascist recruitment tools for young men. It'll be memes where Jewish people are the butt of the joke. It'll be memes talking about how women are hard to date now. It'll be memes about immigration. Other things that we've been seeing recently, if a parent or educator or somebody with a young person is listening to this, they're probably familiar with the video game platform Roblox, right? Roblox is a video game platform where kids can produce content and then consume the content that other kids have produced, sort of like playing with Legos together. However, recently we have seen that on Roblox, lots of kids and older people producing this content have produced scenarios and even little objects that people can buy in Roblox that are, say, the uniform of an ICE agent, or a scenario where some players are immigrants being rounded up and other ones are the guys in the ski masks taking them from their homes, right? That kind of play is going to be part of young people's lives the more and more we see it. I would not be surprised if right now somebody's developing a scenario where, some players are National Guardsmen and others are people trying to get to work in Washington, D.C., being abducted off the street. That's the kind of games, the kinds of ways that people experience this through play and through comedy, or supposed comedy, right? And that's the primary way that young people encounter it for the first time.
You said something surprising on page 81, and it brought back memories of little horses with rainbow manes. You say, My Little Pony, originally marketed toward young women, has gained a strong audience of young men, many of them white supremacists and right wing. What's up with that?
That's a really curious one. This subculture was more active and more prominent 5-ish years ago, even possibly 10 years ago. So to explain this one, this is a little circuitous. Back before Trump won, back before Trump's first presidency, the right wing was dominated by a variant of the right wing called the alt-right. We don't really talk about that anymore, largely because they've been supplanted by whatever the name of the formation is now. We don't really have a perfectly good name for it right now. But the alt-right was smaller, it was more intellectual, it was more online. It was also gayer. There were a relatively large number of young men who were gay, who were into the alt-right. Partly consequently, there was also more right-wing engagement with these kinds of stereotypically feminine pieces of media. For example, My Little Pony, specifically the television show My Little Pony that was on 10 years ago, which I don't remember what it's called. The reason that I included that in the book is, first of all, because it's curious and strange. And second of all, as a reminder to parents and educators and anybody with a young person in their life that that the right wing uses any possible form of cultural cachet, any possible form of cultural capital that it can latch its arms into. It will use it, if it's popular, in order to get people on its side, whatever they can.
It's insidious.
Yes, it'll seep into any possible space that it possibly can.
Another thing you brought up that I'd like you to talk about a little bit, that was one of the more horrifying things you brought up for me, incels, involuntary celibates. My jaw dropped when I read about this. Can you talk a little bit about this aspect of fascism and why it's so dangerous?
Absolutely. So for those of you unfamiliar with the term, as Carolyn just said, incel is a shortened form of involuntary celibate. Originally, the phrase was actually coined by a lesbian woman who was feeling that it was hard for her to find a romantic partner, and she was commiserating with friends online. However, this term came to be adopted and sort of taken over by an online movement, primarily online movement of young men. This movement was more active again, sort of 10, 15 years ago, although it still has tendrils in popular culture today. The incel movement was characterized by a couple things. Primarily, it was about hatred of women and blaming women for the fact that young men could not get dates or have sex with the women that they wanted to have sex with. Ultimately, the incel movement was about something that the right wing is always doing, which is transforming personal issues into societal grievances, right? Now, that's something that the left and progressives do, Your boss is being cruel to you. Well, that's not just you, that's class, right? You didn't get this promotion because of your gender. Well, that's not just your life, that's sexism. The police are harassing you because you're black. Well, that's not just you, that's racism, right? That's what the left and progressives do. The right wing is characterized by doing that falsely, right? This person doesn't want to sleep with you. Well, that's not just you, that's feminism, right? You didn't get this job at work. Well, that's not just you, that's DEI, that's woke, right? So the incel movement was a part of this. It was a part of transforming these individual problems, which young people are really hurt by. And they're, it's perfectly fair to be hurt, whether you're 15 or 55. If you want to date somebody and they don't, of course you'll be hurt. You'll be sad. You might be resentful. You might be angry. Incels transform those personal problems into social grievances. Their claim is that feminism has destroyed young women and made them think about dating in a way that young people don't actually think about dating. But the idea is that it's transformed the way that people think about dating into this transactional numbers game about social status and height and like the size of your biceps and whatever. When in reality, of course, people date people for all sorts of reasons, and people are attracted to all sorts of bodies, and people tend to not want to date people who are creepy, which is, if anything, the incel's big downfall. But having transformed these personal problems into social grievances, incels then encourage and inspire violence on the part of many young men. And so there have been numerous massacres. Probably the most famous in the United States' case being the Bella Vista massacre in Santa Barbara, California, committed by a college student who attempted to enter a sorority house associated with the University of California, Santa Barbara. He was unable to do so, and so instead went on a shooting spree. Not Bella Vista, Isla Vista, the name of the neighborhood. It's the student housing neighborhood in Santa Barbara, California. So instead, he went on a shooting spree there. But there are several other examples of people who specifically identify as incels, involuntary celibates, who use their grievances against women in order to try to kill women, and also the men that they believe have, quote unquote, taken the women from them. Often this is also racially motivated or racially organized. So for example, the shooter in Santa Barbara, he was a person who was mixed race between an Asian mother and a white father, an East Asian mother and a white father. And he believed that he was more racially desirable than black men, and so was specifically angry whenever he saw white women dating black men. That's another logic that often ties these things together here. But no, incels are a particularly disturbing rabbit hole to fall down. If you find a young person talking about, social value in dating, or if you hear a young person talking about like how feminism has destroyed dating for men, or talking about body counts, there are a whole bunch of like little things that if you hear them talking about, your ears should prick up and you should start to get worried.
Thank you. Craig, something you talk about throughout the book reminded me of something my dad used to say when talking about raising children. Maybe it was because we were Catholic. He called it the forbidden fruit concept, that if you tell a child, just as God told Eve, don't eat the apple, or someone told Eve, don't eat the apple, then of course she wanted the apple. And if you tell a teenager, don't do that, they're going to run and do that. So as a parent, he had to be very careful what language he used to not drive us towards the things that he was afraid of. How does that apply to parents and caregivers trying to help their sons navigate pitfalls and the temptations of fascism?
Thank you so much for bringing this up, because this is probably this is one of the things that I hope people come away from the book really connecting with. Lots of parenting advice and lots of advice about fascism and extremism is about prevention, and that's a good thing. Prevention is worth, an ounce of prevention really is worth a pound of cure in this case. However, censorship and forbidding people from encountering messaging is only going to backfire. And that's for a couple reasons. The first is that you can't. You simply cannot prevent a young person from seeing this messaging. It is everywhere. It's coming out of the politicians who are in charge of their countries, in many cases, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. If those politicians aren't in charge of their countries, they're there. They're in parliament, they're in Congress, they're in government somewhere. So you can't stop them, is the first good reason not to try. And the second reason is exactly what you said, this forbidden fruit problem. If you tell a kid you are not allowed to think this thing, you're not allowed to say this thing, you're not allowed to do this thing, yeah, you don't need to be a parent of teenagers to know that that's not going to work. You were a teenager yourself, right? I remember this from being a teenager. I know this as an educator of teenagers and people in their early 20s. I work in college education. When it comes to that, prevention through censorship is not going to work. First of all, because it will make the thing more enticing. And second of all, because this is politics. It is true that you cannot make your son believe something if he simply doesn't. You have to trust him. You have to guide him. You have to be a mentor. You have to be caring about these things. The other really big reason that talking down to somebody in that way, saying you're not allowed to think this, you're not allowed to say that, you're not allowed to do that, is going to backfire, is that fascist messaging online is very, very smart. They're very good at what they do. And one of the things that they prepare young people for is precisely that reaction. They're going to say, okay, now you're going to say this joke to your mom, and she's going to tell you that you're not allowed to talk like that. You're going to share this meme to your brother or your sister, and they're going to be insulted. They're going to yell at you. They're going to make you feel bad. But that's just, to them, proof that the world is conspiring against them, that they're the underdog, that their belief system is the one being oppressed. To them, that's just proof that they're the people being oppressed. It's proof of that transformation of this personal problem into a societal grievance. You're not allowed to think this. It must be true, right? It's conspiracy theory logic. Instead of forbidding these beliefs, instead of forbidding these ways of conversation, instead of forbidding these ideas, you got to do something that they're totally unprepared for, which is to earnestly talk with them and show empathy and sympathy. This is very different from how you should react to fascist messaging when you encounter it in public. In public, you should yell and scream and tell people to shut up. That's what you should do. But when we're talking about the private world, when we're talking about a son, a loved one, somebody in your church group, somebody in a team you coach, that's just not going to work. It's not going to help.
You define those in the book as calling in versus calling out.
Precisely.
Calling in is much more difficult.
It's significantly harder. It takes a lot of emotional energy and work. And that's why I only recommend doing it if you know and trust the person already, and if you and other people are already safe. If they are posing a danger to someone, then no. Saving them from fascism is not the priority. Keeping people safe is the priority. You should only be engaging with these things, only be trying these tactics if people are already safe and secure.
How do we get better at calling in those private situations, do you think?
It's really hard. I was frankly scared and a little embarrassed when I realized that I was writing a book about how to be empathetic towards people who have such heinous beliefs that I disagree with vehemently and believe are some of the most dangerous ideas ever produced by human minds, right? This is why I thought that it's only appropriate to ask this of caretakers, of educators, of people who are already in loving or mentoring positions with young people. The way to get better at it is to lean on the muscles that you already have about these things. Lean on the muscles, the skills that you've already gotten. When a kid really, really messes up, everybody has a young person in their life who's really, really messed up. Maybe they got into drugs. Maybe they destroyed something really valuable. Maybe they flunked some classes. Young people make mistakes. They mess up. And when they mess up, it's the job of their mentors, their caretakers in their lives, not to completely shut them out. The first step has to be, okay, you messed up. What are you going to do about it now? How are you going to make it right? How are you going to make amends? Are you ready to do that? Are you going to try? You know, I'm here if you want to try. But until then, right? So in exactly the same way that if you had a young person in your life who, say, developed a dangerous drug problem, right? If a young person develops a dangerous drug problem, the first response isn't get out of my house forever and I'll never talk to you ever again. The first response is, what can we do? What pushed you to this? What's happening in your life? What are you getting out of this? What problems are you facing that you think this can solve? Fascism is the same set of problems. What drew you to this? What pushed you in this direction? What problems are you facing that you think this can solve? If you think about it in that same way, it's a really helpful way to like organize your response. And especially even when it comes to, yeah, eventually you might need to say, hey, I can't deal with this anymore. This is too dangerous. This is too much for me. If you're ready to make amends, I'm here. But until then, I can't have this in my life. That might be something you'll need to do, but it's not response number one. It might be response number 3 or 4.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference in the age demographics from the younger side of the youth that you're talking about to the older, more adult side? How do a parent or caregiver's strategies differ in those cases?
This is the question that I'm that I'm the most afraid to answer, because I wish that I could say, well, when it comes to younger kids, you know, you're mostly dealing with play, you're mostly dealing with sort of innocuous jokes that you have to shut a kid down, you know, in the same way that a 10-year-old doesn't understand the power of something like the N-word or various misogynist or sexist or homophobic slurs, right? And you might need to educate them on that. They'll make a mistake and you have to tell them, hey, we don't say that word and it's for this reason, right? I wish I could say that that's all we're dealing with when it comes to young people, but that's simply not true. Young people are also engaging in violence when it comes to fascist and misogynist messaging. If you want a fictional but nevertheless real example of this, I would recommend that listeners and viewers check out the Netflix series Adolescence, which is a short mini-series about precisely this problem. The main difference when it comes to young people versus older people, so by young people I mean like 10 to 15, 16, and 16 to 25, is that when we're talking about people who are still in their tweens and early teens, they're still very young. They're looking to adults for mentorship. That's still the time when you can say like, hey, we don't say these things and here's why. Or like, here's something that you don't understand about this that I'd like to tell you about. When we're dealing with teenagers and young adults, these people, many of them, most of them, you know, 18 to 25, they're legally adults. You can't make them do anything. If they have a belief, if they want to vote for somebody, if they want to join an organization, you can't stop them. All you can do is be a guiding light. You can. You have to let go of the reins a little bit. And if something is worrying you, you have to say like, hey, I can't make you do anything, but I can tell you I'm worried about this. You know, I'm scared. I've seen this happen to people before, and you know, I'm worried. Whereas for a younger person, somebody that is still a minor, that you still have legal responsibility for, you have more leeway, more things that you can do to help them.
Let's talk a little bit about that older demographic. One of the places where I teach has a 50-50 split in the student population between Republican and Democrat. So in my classroom, I figure half are pro for the current regime and half are against. And personally, I don't like to take my politics into the classroom because I'm going to alienate half of my students, and they all have a right to the subject matter and to the curriculum. But in those cases where something disturbing is said, how does a professional college instructor navigate that while still honoring the student's right to be a conservative. There's a difference between conservatism and fascism. So how do we tell where that line is? What are there code words? When do we take the student out in the hall and say, I think you've crossed a line here. I'm concerned about you. And when do we not?
This is one that I struggle with in my professional life as well. I teach at an institution that's significantly more liberal than the one that you're describing. But even so, I've always begun courses by saying, hey, whether this class is going to be, I'm a historian, I teach history. I've always begun courses by saying, hey, this course is going to deal with some very sensitive and difficult stuff, whether it affects you and your family or not. Know that it is affecting the families of some of the people in this class, and some of the people in this class are directly affected by some of the creepy, terrifying stuff we're going to be talking about: racism, sexual assault, gender bias, etc. Right? Keep that in mind. I'm going to be keeping it in mind. I want to make sure that everybody feels that they can be their earnest self here. And I say it that way in order to avoid the dog whistles that right-wing folks might be listening to, such as trigger or safe or something like that, right? Literally just to say, like, hey, everybody has a right to be here. Everybody has a right to participate. Everybody has a right to believe whatever they want. What you don't have a right to do is to be cruel to the people who are in this classroom. That, I think, is probably the line to draw, like, hey, if you can't say that word on, like, broadcast television, then, like, maybe this is not the appropriate time. I have fortunately never been in the position where I've had to draw somebody out into the hallway in order to talk to them about something. But I have many colleagues who have, and it's a really tough one. Education is a tough line between the public and the private, right? We have personal relationships with the people that we teach. We mentor them. We see them grow and change. They ask us for letters of recommendation. We work with them on projects, all that sort of stuff. But it's also the public world. It's a world where all ideas need to be heard and respected, even if you disagree with them, which is different from, how I behave if I'm at a protest, right? There are many viewpoints that I do not want to hear at protests that I am attending, and that I will try to drown out. I don't do that in the classroom because A, that's my professional situation, and B, yeah, I believe that education works differently. But that's a tough one. That's one that I struggle with myself.
You're talking about sons, about boys and young men, but you do have one chapter where you talk about girls, women, and non-binary folks. Where do they fit into this?
That chapter I included partly because I knew that it would be wrong to exclusively focus on young men, partly because young men are victims of fascism in that they are victims of its recruitment, and in that fascism is bad and does bad things to society, and so anybody who lives under fascism is experiencing victimization by it. When it comes to talking to young women, non-binary people, trans youth about fascism, it's going to sound a lot more like talking with a young woman about rape culture. It's primarily going to be a warning about content that you will see online that will be disturbing, or that will be cruel to you, or mean, or rhetorically violent. It's about violence that they might actually experience in their life. It's about the dangers of misogynist violence. It's about the dangers of transphobic violence and the dangers of transphobia. However, this is, all of which is to say, there are young women who are fascists, some of them earnestly so, some of them most of them for the same reasons that most people are fascists, which is that they wanted to belong somewhere and they found its belief system moderately palatable already. This is not to say that young women or even trans people cannot be fascists. There's a small but very weird online trans fascist community. But young women who are fascists are more common. It's somewhere around 10 or 15% of most fascist organizations.
In your final chapter, you talk about taking the fight public, protests, fighting fascism out in public culture. And you make a point of saying this is when you do call out, not call in. How do you think we do that effectively, safely?
That's the big one. There are many other wonderful books that cover how to do this that are mostly focused on how to fight fascism in public. I would particularly recommend the works of Spencer Sunshine, who I think is called out in that chapter. But the short version is that when you are fighting fascism in public, the first thing that you need to do is to make sure that you are safe. If you are attending a protest, you have to know that fascist violence is real, it's very possible, as is state violence. You have to be very careful about those things, so typical suggestions for how to stay safe at a protest include wear comfortable shoes, don't wear overly identifiable clothing, bring a snack, bring some water, bring a face mask to keep yourself safer from chemical irritants and chemical weapons that might be deployed. Don't put yourself in danger if that's not your plan. Only do so if that is the plan of you and your friends that you're working with. The other ways to fight fascism safely are all of the other ways that one can fight fascism in public, which are voting, donating money, helping out with the families and livelihoods of people who are putting their lives and bodies on the line. So if you can't risk putting yourself in harm's way at the protest, you can help somebody who is. Take care of their pet, take care of their kid, be ready to pay for their bail, be ready to pay for their medical bills, things like that. There are all sorts of ways that you can help people out without putting yourself at risk, if that's not something that you're willing or able to do. The other ways to be safe are, and this is going to be counterintuitive, is to understand that not fighting is not safe. Sitting back and letting fascism happen is dangerous. It is dangerous to just let it happen and to hope that it'll get better if somebody else does something. That's not going to work. It's not going to happen. Some people need to fight. Everybody needs to vote. Everybody needs to get out there and work. Some people need to donate money. Everybody needs to be organizing. This is not a spectator sport. The last time that fascism was beaten, it took the complete organization of two of the biggest economies on earth, the United States and the Soviet Union. It took the cooperation of dozens and dozens of countries and hundreds of millions of people all over the world. That's what it's going to take. And if you're serious about fighting fascism, you got to get serious about that math. If you believe that fascism is dangerous, it is up to you. Not alone, because you can't do it alone. But you're on the hook. We're all on the hook for this.
I appreciate that response because it really ties back to the fulcrum of your book, which is that it's not if, it's when your son will be exposed to fascism.
Yes.
This is everywhere, and closing eyes to it is on private or public level incredibly dangerous. And I think it might be easy for a parent to do that in certain situations, say, oh, it's just a joke, or oh, he's just kidding, or oh,
Boys will be boys.
boys will be boys. Oh, I said jokes like that when I was his age. And lo and behold, bigger problems emerge. And that leads me to one of my favorite parts of the book where you say, I believe you say the key solution, but I might be overstating it, but a significant solution to avoid youth being drawn into fascism is to make sure they are experiencing a diverse environment. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yes. So fascism can be fought in a lot of ways. Prevention is the biggest and most important one. One of the best ways to keep somebody, and this is a known fact, one of the best ways to keep somebody from being racist, for example, one of the best ways to keep a young person from being sexist or transphobic, for example, is to make sure that they have people like that in their life. And I don't just mean in the town they live in, right? Many Americans live in towns that are diverse on paper, but extremely segregated in practice. Many people live in places that have a relatively diverse population, but send their kids to private schools in order to avoid them, right? Many church communities are some of the most segregated places in the entire country. I believe that's a Malcolm X quote. The most segregated hour of the day is 10 a.m. on Sunday, right? I think that's Malcolm X. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. In any case, diversity alone does not solve this problem. However, diversity can do a lot to help prevent it. Because if young people encounter other young people, become their friends, commiserate with them, feel their pain, feel their joy, then it becomes a lot harder to other them. It becomes a lot harder to hate them. Now, that's not a cure-all, right? Many young people encounter people of different races and people of different sexes and people of different genders and hate them anyway. Some people are just going to feel like that. But for your average folks, it's a big help. Additionally, the fact is that diverse, organized communities are simply stronger when it comes to fighting fascism. It's much harder to fight, to work against movements like this when you're isolated and alone. And many Americans live relatively isolated lives in suburban or exurban communities where it's hard to organize in this way. And this is something that that the United States really has to learn from our comrades in arms in Europe, for example. They're significantly better at this kind of thing. However, I also have a caution here. When it comes to organizing, when it comes to community building and community development, lots of people like to talk about fascism as if it is a community or organization, as if it grows in isolation. That's simply not true. Fascism is an organization. It's a movement, just like any other. It needs to recruit people. It needs messaging. It needs organization. It needs informal circles. It needs like communication networks. It needs all of those things in the same way that any movement does. And so you can't think about fascism as filling a void. It's a competing movement. We're competing with them using the same tactics, the same strategies, which is why fascism works for so many people. It provides them with real community. It provides them with real fellow feeling. It provides them with real friends. And now the organizations, the movements, the belief systems that organize those things are heinous, evil, terrifying. But that doesn't mean it's not real. And I think that that's something that a lot of folks lose sight of when it comes to fascism.
I want to show your book again, Craig Johnson, How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism. This is your first book. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And you also have hosted a podcast for the last few years. As we say goodbye, can you tell us about your podcast?
Absolutely. It's called 15 Minutes of Fascism, a sadly topical podcast covering the global rise of the radical right. It is a weekly news update, news catch-up podcast, about 15 minutes long, generally between 12 and 18 minutes, realistically, talking about fascist news around the world. So the United States, South America, Europe, India, Japan. And every episode closes by celebrating the death of a right-wing figure in history in a segment that I call See You in Hell.
Wow. Tell us how you really feel. Huh?
Well, you need a pick-me-up at the end of the show, right?
And people can find that at the usual
you can
places.
find that wherever good podcasts are given away for free.
We've been speaking to author Craig A. Johnson. You've been listening to a conversation I had with Craig Johnston about his book, How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism. This conversation originally aired September 15th, 2025. This podcast is produced on the sacred ancestral land of the Anishinaabe people, thanks to the California band Castle House for writing and performing our music. The Whimsy Farm podcast airs the 1st and 15th of each month on our YouTube channel, Carolyn Crane and Whimsy Farm, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Thanks to our underwriters, Just Play Productions and Kenna Bliss, and to our paid Patreon members for their support of today's podcast. If you'd like to offer your support, please visit my website, whimsyfarm.net, and click the Patreon link to find a level of support that's right for you. There is also a free membership level. You can email me through the website, as well as access all links to past and current episodes. That's whimsyfarm.net. I'll be back on July 15th with canyoneer Russell James Ray to discuss his book, Canyons of the Mind. Until then, remember the words of Utah Phillips, who said, "Too many good people are doing too many good things to afford me the luxury of being pessimistic." Get out there and create some positive change. Stay safe, everyone.
whimsyfarms.net